Welcome to our timber frame home. In case you haven't been following us for a while, this is a timber frame that we've been working on for a few years now. This is a 36 by 36 Doug fir timber frame. This timber frame started as 3 log truck loads of logs, which we sawmilled over a month period. An amazing army of people came and helped us to cut the joinery and get this timber frame brought to life. When thinking through the type of timber frame that we really wanted for a home, it's something that is kind of a personal decision. You'll see a lot of different styles of post and beam or timber frame construction. We were really attracted to traditional timber framing, which does not use hardware to make all the joints. Instead, it uses wood joinery. This beautiful joint here, called a scarf joint, is actually the intersection of the post with a long tenon and 2 overlapping beams which are notched, and then pegs which hold the entire joint together. The knee braces, which stiffen and provide rigidity to the timber frame, are also held together with pegs. There's a short stub tenon that penetrates the beam and the post, and a hardwood peg is driven through. It's pretty incredible that a huge timber structure like this can be assembled and held together with simple wood pegs. As the wood dries or cures over time, which it does very slowly, because this timber frame was actually cut, assembled, and raised green, the pegs are actually hardwood, and they're very, very dry, so they don't shrink hardly at all. But because the timber frame is green, there's a substantial amount of movement in the wood and shrinkage, and that has the effect of gripping that peg extremely tight, producing a very strong joint over time. Because we're building this home ourselves, we wanted to keep the overall footprint and design of the home simple, and that's how we landed on the 36 by 36 frame size. We didn't want to limit ourselves to 1,300 square feet for the home, so we decided to use a 12-12 roof pitch with an open rafter design. The roof actually complements the structure overall because it's so tall. This sort of complements it as a design feature, but we also gained a substantial amount of living space and really got to enjoy the beauty of a timber structure. Once we got through the insane whirlwind that was sawmilling, cutting the joinery, and raising the timber frame, we wanted to get our loft decking up right away. But for one reason or another, being just the 2 of us kind of cleaning up the mess, we weren't able to get to it. It's sort of deceptive, and because we hadn't really planned on this as part of our strategy, we had to do some measuring and calculating to make sure that we had the right amount of wood. And it turns out that just the extra wood from sawmilling a timber frame was able to cover this entire loft. We took quite a bit of time and really did some calculations, and when we figured out we had enough lumber, we just went to work putting all that beautiful lumber right back through the sawmill and cutting up stuff that would work well for this loft decking. We then took it to a local sawmill who was able to run it through a kiln for us and dry that down. Because they're going to run it through a planer and shaper, it needs to be dry. Of course, you also want the wood to be as stable as possible to limit movement. Getting to complement this timber frame with all of our own tongue and groove loft decking was just a huge perk of sawmilling our own timber frame. This loft decking actually serves more purposes than just a surface to walk on or build a floor on. It's actually part of the engineering or design of the timber frame, and it provides rack resistance or stiffness and rigidity to the entire timber frame. Because our joists are 3 feet apart, we had to use an 1.5 inch thick tongue and groove material. And the tongue and groove is important because it acts more like a monolith or a sheet good than an individual board system. One of the features of the timber frame that's not visible because we have the loft decking on now is what holds the floor joist together. It's actually a very large dovetail tenon that ends up locking the beams together with a floor joist. A lot of traditional construction is built with 16-inch on-center spacing, and a lot of that is actually driven by the fact that sheet goods are 4 feet wide, so it's a logical progression. With timber framing, you have a lot more freedom, and you also have a lot bigger timbers, and so you can do or use a lot less of them to achieve the same thing. The problem is using standard traditional materials, say from a building supply store, becomes problematic, because if you get off of that 4 foot on center or 16 on center spacing, things get really wasteful very quickly. By really thinking through this 3 foot on center spacing, we were able to maximize our lumber with a very, very little waste by making sure that at the sawmill, we were cutting our lumber to around 6 inches over. So a 6 foot board would be 6'6", 9'6", 12'6", etc. So there's a little tiny bit of trimming on each board, but that's good because sometimes when we were to cross cut the board, it would be slightly crooked. Or sometimes in the kiln, you get a little bit of splitting that happens in the ends, which you wouldn't want to be visible on the board. And so it's nice to have just a little bit extra relish, if you will, to trim off. As you can imagine, since this is the finished look on the underside, we had to put a lot of thought into which boards go where. There can be planer snipe, sometimes the grain gets roughed up, sometimes you have large blemishes, if you will, on a board like this that would be extremely visible from the bottom side, and since that's what you're going to be looking at for the rest of your life, it warrants taking your time and really thinking about how do the boards either complement each other or contrast each other. So while it seems like we're just nailing down loft flooring, we're actually simultaneously doing the underside finish work. One of the questions we asked ourselves is, when we're laying in bed looking up at the ceiling for the rest of our lives, which boards do you really want to look at? And yeah, it might sound kind of crazy, but we went through the whole unit and kind of laid out or graded each board. Because when you really think about it, there's places where you can kind of hide boards, or boards with blemishes will be never seen, or they don't affect anything. And so really by thinking through each placement, you end up with a beautiful look on the underside, but you don't have to buy premium wood to achieve that objective. A small detail that was something we had to do back when the timber frame was put up was very subtly notch the bottom of these posts so that the flooring will nest under there. Otherwise, what would happen is it would be visible from the underside. One of the things that we learned about timber framing from this house process is that in most cases, ironically, the timbers are oversized. In fact, in our case, we oversized some of the timbers intentionally to allow for some grading fluctuation. Because we were sawmilling our own timbers, we wanted to make sure that there was some tolerance in there for larger knots or maybe not the strongest pieces, and so we oversized them intentionally. So it might sound crazy, but notching the bottom of this post really doesn't reduce the overall strength of the post in a meaningful way such that it would compromise the structure. In fact, a lot of times posts like this could be much smaller, but it would make the frame look really weird. And so we end up making the post uniform to make the timber frame look uniform, not for its strength properties. During the construction, we kind of had an aha light bulb that came from our engineer. They asked, do you want to put the floor joist in the front, or did you want to keep that open? And at the very last minute, we actually decided to keep that area open for now, so that from the living area, you can see all the way up to the ceiling, giving those areas a very large and open feeling. It also allows us to enjoy the light that these big windows provide. If we were to floor over that area, it would greatly diminish the amount of natural light in these living areas, which is something that we really like about the design, is the amount of natural light. So for now, we're sticking with this 2/3 loft, 1/3 open area, and we have left the door open to add the floor joists. We still have them, and we would simply have to add the joinery to these carrying beams, and we could add additional living space up here if we so chose. That's one of the beautiful flexibilities of timber frame. This framing material that you see across this open area is of course just for working. This will all be disassembled at some point, leaving this area open to the ceiling. We're going to be doing a different video sharing the design of this loft area and our vision for how to maximize it, so stay tuned for that. We're going to have to get a little bit creative because there's some effect of the plumbing downstairs. We have the stair entry over here, and then of course we're going to have some sort of railing system on the front side here. So what's next? Well, this is actually not the floor. This is actually just a decking material. And so we're going to have to build a false floor. We'll need a place to run electrical service. We've got some plumbing to do in a bathroom that's going to go up here. Of course, some noise insulation. And then eventually we'll have built the actual subfloor that will be for the loft. So those are some of the projects that we'll be working on in the near future.